It is 70,000 years ago. A small group of people, maybe a few hundred, maybe fewer, stands at the edge of a continent. Behind them, everything they have ever known, every fire they have sheltered beside, every burial site of every ancestor they have ever loved. Ahead of them, nothing familiar, just wind, rock, and a world that has never heard a human footstep. They cross anyway. What happens next is the most consequential journey in the history of life on this planet. Welcome to ChronoVault, where we go back to the moments that made us. I'm your guide through deep time. And every episode we pull one thread from history and follow it all the way to you. Today's thread? It starts in Africa. It ends everywhere. This is the story of how a single species, our species, walked out of one continent and conquered the entire planet. And tomorrow, we'll follow the next great revolution, the agricultural revolution, when humans stopped chasing food and started growing it. Stay tuned for that. But first, let's go back to the beginning. To understand this story, you need to hold a number in your head. 300,000 years. That's how long modern humans, Homo sapiens, have existed. 300,000 years of living, loving, struggling, and surviving on the African continent before a single one of us set foot anywhere else on Earth. Think about that. Every culture, every language, every tradition we call ancient. Egyptian civilization, Mesopotamia, ancient China, all of that happened in just the last 5,000 to 7,000 years. That's less than 2% of our total existence as a species. For the other 98%, we were African. Now, the people living in Africa during this period were not primitive cave dwellers stumbling blindly through the dark. They were fully modern humans. The same brain capacity as you. The same emotional intelligence. The same capacity for language, planning, and imagination. They made art. They made tools. They buried their dead with ceremony. But around 74,000 years ago, something catastrophic happened. Something so devastating that it almost ended the human story before it truly began. And then, against all odds, a small group, geneticists estimate somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 individuals, made a crossing out of Africa that would eventually put human beings on every continent on Earth. Except Antarctica. Let that sink in. Every person alive today who is not of purely African descent traces their entire lineage back to that tiny group, a population smaller than a typical high school graduating class. The most widespread species on the planet started with a handful of people willing to walk into the unknown. Here's how it happened. The story of human migration begins long before anyone migrated anywhere. Around 300,000 years ago, in the region we now call Morocco, at a site called Jebel Irhoud, the earliest known fossils of Homo sapiens appear in the archaeological record. These people were not the only humans on Earth. Far from it. Our planet was shared with at least 4 other human species. Neanderthals roaming Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans across Siberia and East Asia. Homo erectus still persisting in pockets of the world. And possibly others we haven't yet discovered. What made Homo sapiens different? The honest answer is, we're still working that out. But the evidence points to a combination of advantages. We had slightly more flexible thinking. The ability to combine ideas in new ways. We formed larger social networks. We could cooperate with strangers, people outside our immediate family, in ways that other hominids apparently couldn't. We could also tell stories. That might sound small. It isn't. The ability to create and share a shared fiction. We are all part of the same tribe, even if we've never met, is what allows large-scale human cooperation. It's what allows armies, trade networks, religions, and nations to exist. And 300,000 years ago, it was already working for us. For tens of thousands of years. Our ancestors spread across the African continent. The evidence shows multiple distinct populations developing in different regions. East Africa, North Africa, Southern Africa, occasionally mixing, occasionally isolated. This wasn't a static world. Africa is enormous, and its climate was constantly shifting, opening and closing corridors between regions as ice ages came and went. By around 120,000 years ago, there's archaeological evidence that small groups of Homo sapiens made early forays out of Africa, through the Levant corridor, into the Middle East, but these early migrants didn't make it far. The fossils vanish. The lineages didn't persist. The world wasn't quite ready to be conquered yet. And then, catastrophe. 74,000 years ago, on the island of Sumatra in Southeast Asia, a supervolcano called Toba erupted. This wasn't a normal volcanic eruption. This was the largest eruption in the last 2 million years. A blast estimated at roughly 5,000 times the power of the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption. Ash covered an area from India to the South China Sea. The eruption injected so much sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere that it triggered a volcanic winter, blocking sunlight for potentially 6 years. Global temperatures may have dropped by 15 degrees Celsius. Forests died. Food chains collapsed. Ice expanded. And for humanity, already spread thin across Africa in small, scattered populations, it may have been nearly fatal. Genetic analysis of modern human populations reveals something disturbing. Around this exact period, our species appears to have undergone a severe genetic bottleneck. The diversity in human DNA today suggests we all descend from a surprisingly small ancestral population. Some estimates put the total surviving human population after Toba at as few as 10,000 to 40,000 individuals worldwide. Other estimates go even lower. To put that in context, today there are more mountain gorillas on Earth than there were humans after Toba. We almost didn't make it. The people who survived likely did so by retreating to refugia, sheltered pockets of Africa where conditions remained livable. They rebuilt, slowly, generation by generation, over thousands of years. Populations recovered, spread back across the continent, and genetic diversity began to rebuild. Now here's where the story takes a turn nobody expected. Roughly 70,000 years ago, possibly a few thousand years after Toba's aftermath, something changed. The Sahara, which periodically became a green corridor during wetter climate phases, may have opened a pathway northward and eastward. The Red Sea coastline offered another route, and this time, the crossing stuck. A group, small but determined, left Africa. They followed the coastlines. They moved through what is now the Arabian Peninsula, into South Asia, and onward into Southeast Asia. The pace was slow. We're talking about generations of people gradually moving, not a single group making a heroic march. Coastal environments were rich with seafood and resources, and our ancestors followed that abundance like a highway. Most people imagine our ancestors marching in a single great wave. The truth is far stranger. The real migration was not a single event. It was thousands of years of incremental movement. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Some groups pushed east, others looped back. Dead ends were common. Climate shifts would open new corridors, then close them. The story of human migration is less like a Roman legion advancing and more like water slowly finding its way through a maze. By 50,000 years ago, humans had reached South Asia and were pushing into Southeast Asia. By 45,000 years ago, they had done something that still astonishes archaeologists. They had crossed open ocean and reached Australia. Think about that. 45,000 years ago, there were no GPS systems, no maps, no metal boats. And yet groups of humans looked at the sea, built watercraft of some kind, and sailed to a continent that no human being had ever seen. The distance from Southeast Asia to Australia, even during lower sea levels of the last ice age, still required open ocean crossings of at least 90 kilometers, completely out of sight of land. This was not accidental. This was deliberate maritime navigation by people who had never been told it was impossible. By 40,000 years ago, humans had reached Europe, but what happened next is something most history books leave out entirely. Because when our ancestors arrived in Europe, they weren't alone. Europe had been home to Neanderthals for over 400,000 years. These were not brutish, dim-witted creatures. That's a Hollywood stereotype we need to retire. Neanderthals had large brains, made tools, buried their dead, and may have created art. They were, in many ways, people. And when Homo sapiens arrived in their territory, the two groups didn't simply ignore each other. They interbred. We know this because of DNA. Modern genetic analysis has found that virtually all humans of non-African descent carry between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA in their genome. Some populations, particularly those in Oceania and parts of Asia, also carry DNA from the Denisovans, another archaic human group. What does this mean? It means you are not purely Homo sapiens. You are, technically, a hybrid, a descendant of a species that absorbed genetic material from at least two other human lineages that no longer exist as separate populations. That's not a metaphor. That is literally what your DNA says. The Neanderthals themselves disappeared from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago, roughly the same time Homo sapiens fully established itself in Europe. Whether the cause was competition, disease, climate change, or simply being absorbed into our gene pool, we don't know for certain. Likely some combination of all of these. But one thing is clear. They did not simply vanish. Part of them lives on. In you. With Europe, Asia, and Australia settled, there was one major landmass left. The Americas. Around 15,000 years ago. Possibly earlier. Evidence is still debated. Groups of humans living in northeastern Asia followed megafauna herds across Beringia, a land bridge up to 1,600 kilometers wide that connected modern-day Siberia to Alaska during the last ice age. Today it's underwater. That's the Bering Strait. Once in North America, the descendants of these first Americans spread with extraordinary speed. Within just a few thousand years, humans had reached the tip of South America, a distance of 17,000 kilometers from Alaska. When you consider that most of this movement was on foot, following game and edible plants through completely unknown terrain, the pace is staggering. By 12,000 years ago, humans had filled both North and South America. Every environment, Arctic tundra, tropical rainforest, high mountain plateau, coastal desert, was colonized and adapted to. The Americas were fully human. And this is the part that still gives me chills. Because even after all of that, after spreading across 6 continents over 70,000 years, there was still one frontier left. The Pacific Ocean. The Pacific covers 1/3 of Earth's surface. It is the largest geographic feature on this planet, and scattered across it, separated by thousands of miles of open water, are hundreds of islands, most of them tiny, many of them invisible from any nearby shore. One by one, over thousands of years, humans reached them. The greatest navigators in human history were the Polynesian people, descendants of migrants who had moved through Southeast Asia and into the Pacific over millennia, using technologies that are only now being fully appreciated. Deep knowledge of stars, ocean currents, wave patterns, bird migration routes, and wind. They sailed outrigger canoes across distances that would terrify most modern sailors. No compass, no instruments, no charts, By roughly 1000 AD, Polynesian navigators had reached Hawaii, New Zealand, and Easter Island, completing the human settlement of every habitable island in the Pacific. Easter Island sits 3,500 kilometers from the nearest significant landmass. These were the last humans to reach their homeland, and they got there by reading the ocean itself as a map. The human migration was complete. 7 continents, every climate zone, every environment from frozen tundra to tropical reef. 1 species. 70,000 years. So what does all of this mean for us today? First, we are one. Not in a feel-good, bumper sticker sense. In a literal, biological, provable sense. Every human being alive today shares a common ancestor from Africa. Genetic analysis can trace all human lineages back to a common origin point on that continent. The diversity we see in modern humans, different appearances, languages, cultures, is the result of tens of thousands of years of adaptation to different environments. It is surface variation layered over a shared foundation. Second, our shared story is written in our DNA in ways we're only beginning to read fully. The Human Genome Project and its successors have given us an unprecedented ability to trace ancient migrations. We can now look at the genomes of people living today in Brazil, Norway, Papua New Guinea, and Mongolia and reconstruct the journeys their ancestors took to get there, sometimes with remarkable precision. Third, and this is the part one find most philosophically challenging, we are a hybrid species. The Neanderthal DNA in your genome is not contamination. It may actually be useful. Some studies suggest that inherited Neanderthal variants affect immune function, skin composition, and even pain sensitivity. The ancient interbreeding wasn't just a curious footnote. It was a genetic inheritance that modern humans continue to benefit from. And finally, perhaps most relevant today, every debate about migration, borders, and who belongs somewhere takes on a different character when you zoom out far enough. Humans have always moved, always migrated, always followed resources, fled catastrophe, and sought better lives somewhere over the next horizon. The story of human migration isn't ancient history. It's the story we're still living. Before we go, let's lock in the 3 facts from today's episode that I guarantee will come up the next time you talk to someone about human history. Fact number 1. The Toba bottleneck. 74,000 years ago, a supervolcano in Sumatra erupted with such force that it may have reduced the entire human population on Earth to as few as 10,000 individuals. Every person alive today, all 8 billion of us, may descend from that tiny group of survivors. The next time someone tells you humanity is resilient, you can tell them, we came back from that. Fact number 2. You are part Neanderthal. If your ancestry is non-African, between 1% and 4% of your DNA comes from Neanderthals, a separate human species that went extinct roughly 40,000 years ago. Some East Asian and Ocean populations also carry Denisovan DNA. Modern Homo sapiens is not a pure species. We are, and have always been, the product of ancient mixings. Fact number 3. The last great migration was across the Pacific. While most people focus on the ancient migration out of Africa, the final chapter of human planetary settlement was written by Polynesian sailors who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean, with no instruments, no maps, and no guarantee of finding land, to reach Hawaii, New Zealand, and Easter Island around 1000 AD. These were not explorers backed by governments and navies. They were communities with children and elders, seeds and animals, setting out across the largest ocean on Earth because they chose to. And honestly, that last one changed the way I think about human courage entirely. That's the story of how one species, born in Africa, nearly wiped out by a supervolcano, carrying the DNA of vanished relatives, walked, sailed, and paddled its way to every corner of this planet. If this video opened something up for you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And if you know someone who loves history, or who just needs a reminder of how extraordinary human beings actually are, share this with them. It costs nothing and means everything to this channel. Drop a comment below. Which part of this story hit you hardest? The Toba near-extinction? The Neanderthal DNA? Or the Pacific navigators? Next time on ChronoVault, the agricultural revolution. The day 10,000 years ago when humans stopped following food and started growing it. It sounds peaceful. It wasn't. The transition from nomadic hunter-gatherer to settled farmer triggered inequality, warfare, and disease on a scale our ancestors had never seen. And it set the stage for every civilization that followed. I'll see you then.